Coming up today, could North Korea be readying a ballistic missile test? A report says final preparations are underway. The speculation comes as the US and China struggle to reach a consensus on the level of sanctions on Pyongyang for its recent nuclear test. With an eye on the global economy, the US Federal Reserve declines to raise rates, but doesn't rule out an increase in March. Plus, Samsung Electronics posts a 40% fall in its fourth quarter net profit on the back of flagging smartphone sales. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Thursday, the 28th of January. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. We start with that news that North Korea could be close to conducting yet another long-range ballistic missile test. South Korea has vowed to respond to any provocation from north of the border. Experts say that if Pyongyang decided to launch a missile so soon after its fourth nuclear test, the regime would seriously strain China's patience and expose itself to even harsher sanctions. Gwon-soo reports.
Less than a month after its fourth nuclear test, North Korea might be gearing up for a ballistic missile test, possibly within a week's time. That's according to Tokyo-based Kyodo News Agency on Wednesday, which cited an unnamed Japanese government source who said recent satellite imagery indicates North Korea could soon launch a long-range missile from its main launch site in Dongchang-ni on its northwest coast. South Korea's defense ministry said Thursday the military is keeping an eye out for any signs of a launch and is ready for any kind of provocation. While the ministry could not verify the Japanese report, spokesperson Kim Min-seok told reporters there are concerns, as in the past North Korea had always test-fired a missile prior to a nuclear test, but this time it hadn't. A U.S. Defense Department spokesman told Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency that the U.S. is urging North Korea to, quote, refrain from actions and rhetoric that threaten regional peace and security. If Pyongyang does conduct a missile test, it's highly likely it will face heavy consequences, as the UN Security Council is currently in the midst of talks on sanctioning the regime for its recent nuclear test. Experts say there is a chance the international community could seek ways to ratchet up the sanctions against North Korea to a much higher level than they would for just the nuclear test. China could also strengthen its position. That remains to be seen, though, as the U.S. and China have so far failed to narrow the gap on the degree of sanctions that will be imposed, even after talks between U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on Wednesday. Meanwhile, 5 of the countries involved in the long-stalled six-party denuclearization talks have also failed to find consensus on a proposal made by President Park Geun-hye last week to resume the multilateral forum without North Korea, with the U.S. expressing support for it and Russia dismissing the idea. Kwon-soo, Arirang News.
Now, as widely expected, the US Federal Reserve has taken a wait-and-see approach to interest rates this month. US shares plunged on the news as the Fed gave no indication of when it might start lifting rates again. Hwang Ji-ae has the details.
Facing massive turmoil in financial markets, the U.S. Federal Reserve opted to hold its key rate steady on Wednesday. The Fed said it was closely monitoring global and financial developments and how they could affect the U.S. labor market and inflation. Yet the central bank gave little indication of when it will raise rates again. Last month, the Fed increased rates for the first time in almost a decade and suggested 4 more rate hikes this year. As investors were hoping for a stronger sign, the Fed might back away from future rate hikes due to plunging oil prices and the slowdown in China that resulted in a substantial sell-off in global stock markets. Wall Street dropped sharply on Wednesday. The S&P 500 closed down over 1%, while the Nasdaq dropped more than 2%.
And I think from an equity market perspective, where companies have been facing difficult pricing power, difficult global economic conditions, difficult domestic economic conditions, having a Federal Reserve that's not your cheerleader is just not well received, and that's why we're having the response we're having from the markets.
Asian stocks also took a hit from the Fed's statement. Korea's benchmark Kospi opened over 0.5% lower at 1,885.38 on Thursday. 황지혜, Arirang News.
Now, the ongoing slowdown in the tech sector is turning up the heat on Samsung Electronics. Tepid global demand for IT products caused the Korean firm's profits to slump heavily in the fourth quarter. The company says 2016 is going to be even more challenging. Kim Min-ji has the details.
Korea's biggest tech firm saw its profit fall sharply in the fourth quarter of last year. Samsung Electronics says its net profit came to $2.7 billion in the October to December period, down almost 40% from a year ago. The sharp downturn came despite a 16% on-year increase in operating profit and sales edging up over 1%. Breaking it down by sector, Samsung's chip arm, which has been the company's core business, posted an operating profit of $2.3 billion, slightly higher than last year. Its IT and mobile division, which has been weighing on earnings, edged up to $1.8 billion. The operating profit of Samsung's consumer electronics sector jumped more than fourfold to $680 million, driven by strong sales, especially in the U.S. Analysts attribute the weak earnings to slowing chip and smartphone sales and weaker prices of DRAMs and LCD panels. Samsung wasn't able to benefit from exchange rates in the fourth quarter either, compared with the previous quarter, which gave Samsung gains of about $660 million. The company says earnings could weaken further this year due to a difficult business environment and a slump in demand for IT products. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, with sanctions against Iran lifted after compliance with the landmark nuclear deal, Korea is working fast to broaden its economic ties with Tehran. But first, Seoul wants to ensure a long-standing payment system that's been used since sanctions were first imposed remains in place. For more on the system and why it's so important to Korea, Lee Ji-won reports.
Officials from Korea's finance ministry, foreign ministry, and banks will meet with their Iranian counterparts during a 3-day trip that starts Saturday. According to financial institutions on Thursday, their talks will focus on maintaining the Korean currency payment system. The system is a method through which Korea and Iran have made financial transactions since sanctions restricted all financial transactions with Iran in 2010. Under the system, Iran had accounts in Korean banks to facilitate trade in oil and other exports. As oil prices rose along with the increase in Korea's oil imports, the balance in the accounts grew massive, with the current amount estimated to be between $2.5 and $3.5 billion. Iran says it is now planning to withdraw the money to restore its economy. The decision is expected to have an impact not only on Korean banks, but could also increase the uncertainty for Korean companies seeking to do business in the country. The Korean government says its officials will try to find other ways to help Iran, including expanding the payment system to include euros and other international currencies. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, Korean mortgage loans grew at a record pace last year on the back of a surge in demand for homes and skyrocketing rental fees. The Financial Supervisory Service reported the amount of outstanding mortgage loans in December was just over $5 billion, bringing the total amount of fresh loans in 2015 to $58.3 billion. And this is the largest increase in mortgage loans since 2011. At the end of last year, the total amount of home-backed loans was slightly below $395 billion. The loan delinquency rate fell to a record low last year. The financial watchdog says this is because banks wrote off long overdue bonds worth over $3 billion before the new year. The mosquito-borne Zika virus is spreading across more of North and South America, but fears about the virus, which can cause severe birth defects, is reaching beyond the region. New cases have been reported in Europe and in several states in the US. Son Jong-in has the details.
With no vaccine or treatment, health officials are resorting to primitive methods to stem the spread of the Zika virus. Brazil, which estimates around 1.5 million people have contracted the virus since May last year, is launching a campaign to educate citizens on how to combat the outbreak. Health authorities are also spraying insecticide to kill mosquitoes around public facilities in affected areas. The U.S., which is strengthening efforts to fight the virus since it saw at least 6 confirmed cases in New York, Arkansas, and Virginia, is also focusing on sharing information about the risks posed by the virus.
I would anticipate in the days ahead that you'll see more of a conspicuous, concerted effort on the part of the U.S. government to communicate with the American people about the risks of this virus and the steps they can take to protect themselves.
U.S. President Barack Obama has called for the rapid development of tests, vaccines, and treatments following the World Health Organization's forecast that the virus is likely to spread across nearly all of the Americas. Europe is not a safe zone either. Denmark and Switzerland have joined a growing number of European countries to report Zika infections among travelers returning from Latin America in recent days. Scientists around the world are in different stages of developing vaccines against the virus that is linked to brain deformities in babies. But they warn it could be more than a decade before a vaccine is publicly available since it can take years to be approved by regulators. 손정인, Arirang News.
Now, a private fundraising campaign to help victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery has raised more than $84,000 in the space of just 2 weeks. The Korean Council for the Women Drafted for Military Sexual Slavery by Japan launched the campaign earlier this month in conjunction with 400 other civic organizations. More than 1,000 people have contributed to the campaign, which is still ongoing. The council said the money will replace the $8.4 million that the Japanese government promised towards a foundation for the victims as part of the recent settlement struck by Korea and Japan. The council said the groups will also seek to nullify that settlement. Korea's LG Display topped global display shipments for the second straight year last year. Figures compiled by industry tracker Witsview show LG Display sold 41.5 million panels in 2015, giving the company nearly 30% of the global market share, higher than its 26% share the previous year. Taiwan's AU Optronics Corporation ranked second with 18% market share in 2015. Now, these figures include the company's organic LED, liquid crystal display and plasma display panel products, including laptop screens. However, the industry tracker says that, as a whole, the global display market shrank 11% last year on sluggish demand. Seoul subway operators are being weighed down by an increase in the number of fare exemptions that let people ride for free. According to the Seoul city government, the loss in revenue from subway fare exemptions totaled $260.9 million in 2015, and that's an increase of nearly 10% from the previous year and accounts for nearly 85% of the shortfall reported by Seoul subway operators last year. The rise in lost revenue is attributed to the increasing number of people who ride for free, the proportion of which exceeded 14% of the passenger total for the first time in 2015. Currently, seniors who are 65 and older, people who are disabled, and people of merit can ride public transportation in the Korean capital for free. Seoul city officials say subway operators' deficits will continue to grow unless the government provides them with subsidies. Now, one company that certainly doesn't need any subsidies is Facebook, and it has posted spectacular fourth quarter revenue and earnings. The social media giant says it earned $5.63 billion in revenue from advertising alone, and around 4/5 of that came from its improved mobile app. And the figure in terms of revenue from advertising was up a staggering 57% on year. The company smashed expectations on profits as well. Facebook posted profits of over $1.6 billion, breaking the $1 billion profit mark for the first time in its history. As of December, Facebook had almost 1.6 billion monthly active users, up 14% from the same period last year, with most people using the site on their smartphones. Now, thousands of people are expected in Korea's southeastern city of Busan today for Asia's largest drone festival. That's dubbed Drone Show Korea. Officials say around 60 companies from 4 countries are going to show off their latest models during the 3-day event, which is co-sponsored by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy and the Busan city government. The Korea Aerospace Research Institute is displaying its tilt-rotor aircraft, the TR-100. This is a drone with helicopter-like hovering capabilities that can take off and land vertically on an unprepared area. The Korea Electronics Technology Institute is also unveiling new technology that combines the Internet of Things and drones. Stories we've been following on this Thursday afternoon here in Seoul. Thank you for watching, and we do appreciate your viewership greatly. Have a nice day. Goodbye.